Close your eyes and drift back in time to when our planet was still shaping itself, still deciding what it would become. The Mediterranean Sea that we know today is actually quite young in geological terms, only about 5.3 million years old in its current form. But the story begins much earlier, in an ancient time when the continents themselves were wandering travelers. Around 200 million years ago, there existed a vast ocean called the Tethys Sea, which stretched between the supercontinents of Gondwana to the south and Laurasia to the north. As these massive landmasses slowly drifted and collided, the Tethys Sea began to close, like a great mouth slowly shutting over millions of years. But the Mediterranean's most dramatic moment came during an event scientists call the Messinian salinity crisis, which occurred between 5.96 and 5.33 million years ago. During this period, the Strait of Gibraltar closed, cutting off the Mediterranean from the Atlantic Ocean. Without this connection, something extraordinary happened. The entire Mediterranean Sea began to evaporate under the hot sun. Over perhaps 1,000 years or less, this massive body of water dried up almost completely, leaving behind a desert basin more than 4 kilometers deep in places, crusted with thick layers of salt. Imagine standing where ships now sail, looking up at cliffs of rock towering above you, once the shores of an ancient sea. Then, in one of Earth's most spectacular natural events, the Atlantic Ocean broke through at Gibraltar. Water cascaded into the dry basin in what geologists call the Zanclean Flood, potentially the largest waterfall Earth has ever known. Some scientists estimate the Mediterranean refilled in anywhere from a few months to a few thousand years, a mere blink in geological time. Today, the Mediterranean Sea covers approximately 2.5 million square kilometers, making it one of the largest inland seas on Earth. It stretches about 3,800 kilometers from east to west, from the coasts of Spain and Gibraltar to the shores of Lebanon and Israel. From north to south, it spans roughly 1,600 kilometers at its widest point, reaching from the coasts of France and Croatia down to the shores of Libya. The sea's average depth is about 1,500 meters, but it plunges to its deepest point in the Calypso Deep, part of the Hellenic Trench south of Greece, where the seafloor drops to 5,267 meters below the surface. This is a place of perpetual darkness and crushing pressure, where few creatures venture. The Mediterranean holds approximately 3.75 million cubic kilometers of water, enough to cover the entire United States in water more than 400 meters deep. Yet despite this massive volume, the Mediterranean is considered an evaporation basin, losing more water to evaporation than it receives from rainfall and rivers combined. In fact, the Mediterranean loses about 1 meter of water from its surface each year to evaporation. If the Strait of Gibraltar were somehow sealed today, the entire sea would evaporate in about 1,000 years, just as it did during the Messinian salinity crisis. But this doesn't happen because the Atlantic Ocean constantly replenishes it. Through the Strait of Gibraltar, which is only about 14 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, a massive current of Atlantic water flows eastward into the Mediterranean. This surface current brings in approximately 1.75 million cubic meters of water per second, nearly 4 times the flow of the Amazon River, the world's largest river by discharge. But there's a hidden current flowing the opposite direction. Deep beneath the incoming Atlantic water, a layer of denser, saltier Mediterranean water flows westward out into the Atlantic. This is because the Mediterranean is saltier than the Atlantic Ocean, about 38 parts per thousand compared to the Atlantic's 35 parts per thousand, and this extra salt comes from all that evaporation. The Mediterranean Sea connects to 3 other bodies of water through narrow passages that have shaped human history. To the southeast, the Suez Canal, completed in 1869, links it to the Red Sea and beyond to the Indian Ocean. This human-made waterway is 193 kilometers long and transformed global shipping routes. To the northeast, the Mediterranean connects to the Black Sea through a series of straits: the Dardanelles, the Sea of Marmara, and the Bosphorus. The Bosphorus, running through Istanbul, is one of the world's busiest maritime passages, just 700 meters wide at its narrowest point. The Mediterranean is divided by geographers into several distinct basins and seas, each with its own character. The Western Mediterranean includes the Alboran Sea between Spain and Morocco, the Balearic Sea around the Balearic Islands, the Ligurian Sea along northern Italy, and the Tyrrhenian Sea between the Italian peninsula, Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. The central Mediterranean encompasses the waters around Sicily, including the Strait of Sicily, which separates this island from North Africa. To the east lies the Ionian Sea between southern Italy, Greece, and Albania, some of the deepest waters in the entire Mediterranean. The eastern Mediterranean contains the Adriatic Sea, stretching up between Italy and the Balkans like a sheltered gulf. Further east is the Aegean Sea, scattered with thousands of Greek islands like jewels dropped on dark blue velvet. Then comes the Levantine Basin, the easternmost and deepest part of the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean coastline stretches for approximately 46,000 kilometers, touching 21 countries across 3 continents. On the European shore, from west to east, it meets Spain, France, Monaco, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Albania, Greece, and the divided island of Cyprus. On the Asian coast, it touches Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. The African shore belongs to Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. Each of these nations has been shaped by the sea and in turn has shaped its waters. The sea's influence on climate is profound and reaches far inland. The Mediterranean climate, hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters, exists because of the sea's presence. In summer, the sea is cooler than the land, creating high-pressure systems that push away rain clouds. In winter, the sea retains heat and releases it slowly, warming the surrounding lands. This climate zone extends not just around the Mediterranean basin, but is found in only 4 other regions on Earth: coastal California, central Chile, the Cape region of South Africa, and southwestern and southern Australia. Together, these Mediterranean climate zones cover less than 3% of Earth's land surface, yet they support about 20% of the world's plant species. The sea's water temperature varies with the seasons and location. In summer, surface waters in the eastern Mediterranean can reach 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, making them among the warmest in any open sea on Earth. In winter, these same waters cool to about 15 to 18 degrees Celsius, while the western Mediterranean becomes cooler still, sometimes dropping to 12 to 14 degrees Celsius. But temperature changes with depth. Below about 200 meters, throughout the entire Mediterranean, the water maintains a constant temperature of about 13 to 14 degrees Celsius year-round. This stable, cool layer is like the sea's deep memory, unchanging as seasons pass above. The Mediterranean's tides are among the smallest of any sea on Earth. While the Atlantic coasts of Europe can see tidal ranges of 10 meters or more, most of the Mediterranean experiences tides of less than 30 centimeters. In some areas, particularly the Adriatic and Aegean, tides are barely noticeable at all. This happens because the Mediterranean is nearly enclosed and connected to the ocean by such a narrow strait. Ocean tides simply cannot transmit their full energy through the Strait of Gibraltar fast enough. It's like trying to fill a bottle by pouring water through a narrow funnel. The water can only flow so fast. However, what the Mediterranean lacks in tides, it makes up for in other water movements. Strong currents flow along its coasts, and the sea is prone to seiches, standing waves that slosh back and forth, particularly in the Adriatic, raising and lowering water levels by a meter or more. The sea also experiences a phenomenon called medicanes, Mediterranean hurricanes. These rare weather systems form when cold air masses from northern Europe move over the warm Mediterranean waters in autumn and winter. Though smaller and weaker than tropical hurricanes, they can still bring intense winds and flooding to coastal areas. Wind has always been the Mediterranean's master. The ancient Greeks and Romans learned to read its moods, naming the winds and building their sailing calendars around them. The Mistral blows cold and fierce from the Rhone Valley down into the Gulf of Lion, sometimes reaching 185 kilometers per hour. The Sirocco begins in the Sahara Desert, picks up moisture over the Mediterranean, and arrives on Europe's southern shores as a hot, humid wind that can carry African sand thousands of kilometers north, sometimes painting cars in Germany with red desert dust. The Bora is a fierce, cold wind that plunges down from the mountains to the Adriatic coast, while the Melt Emmy blows across the Aegean Sea in summer, making sailing both possible and treacherous. Ancient sailors planned their voyages around these winds, knowing that fighting them was futile. The Mediterranean's waters are remarkably clear compared to most seas. Visibility can exceed 40 meters in some areas, particularly in the eastern basin. This clarity comes from the sea's low nutrient content. It is what scientists call oligotrophic, meaning few nutrients. This seems paradoxical. Fewer nutrients mean less plankton, and less plankton means fewer fish and other marine life. Indeed, the Mediterranean supports only about 4 to 18% of the marine biomass per unit area found in the Atlantic Ocean. Yet this clarity has its own beauty, and the sea still supports an extraordinary diversity of life. Scientists estimate that between 10,000 and 12,000 marine species live in the Mediterranean, representing about 7 to 8% of the world's marine biodiversity, despite accounting for less than 1% of the ocean's surface area. This remarkable diversity exists because the Mediterranean is a meeting place, a crossroads where Atlantic species mix with endemic species found nowhere else on Earth. About 20 to 30% of Mediterranean marine species are endemic, meaning they evolved here and exist nowhere else. These include the Mediterranean monk seal, one of the world's most endangered marine mammals with fewer than 700 individuals remaining, and the loggerhead sea turtle, which nests on beaches throughout the region. The sea is home to 5 species of sea turtles, 8 species of whales and dolphins, and more than 700 species of fish. The great white shark, often associated with South Africa and Australia, also inhabits Mediterranean waters, though sightings are rare and the population appears to be declining. One of the Mediterranean's most ancient inhabitants is the noble pen shell, or Pinna nobilis, a massive bivalve mollusk that can grow up to 120 centimeters long. It attaches itself to the seabed with strong threads called byssus, which ancient peoples harvested and wove into a fabric called sea silk, one of the rarest and most valuable textiles in history. Sadly, a parasite has devastated this species since 2016, pushing it toward extinction. The Mediterranean seafloor is not flat but ridged and trenched, scarred by the forces that continue to shape it. The sea sits atop a complex boundary where the African tectonic plate pushes northward into the Eurasian plate at a rate of about 2 to 3 centimeters per year, roughly the speed your fingernails grow. This collision creates earthquakes and volcanoes around the Mediterranean rim. Mount Vesuvius, Mount Etna, and Stromboli in Italy, Santorini in Greece, all are products of this ongoing tectonic drama. The devastating earthquakes that have struck Turkey, Greece, Italy, and North Africa throughout history are reminders that the Mediterranean is still being born. Beneath the seafloor lie vast salt deposits, some more than 2 kilometers thick, remnants of the Messinian salinity crisis when the sea evaporated. These salt layers are so thick and so pure that they represent one of Earth's largest salt deposits. Evidence of a time when the Mediterranean basin was a hell of evaporite flats and salt mountains. The Mediterranean has been a highway for human migration and trade for at least 10,000 years. The oldest known seafaring trade routes date to around 8,000 BCE, when obsidian from the volcanic island of Melos in the Aegean was being transported to mainland settlements. By 3000 BCE, the Minoan civilization on Crete had developed sophisticated ships and established trade networks across the eastern Mediterranean. They were followed by the Phoenicians, who by 1500 BCE had become the Mediterranean's greatest sailors, founding colonies as far west as Spain and venturing beyond Gibraltar into the Atlantic. The ancient Greeks called it various names depending on which part they were discussing, but the Romans gave it the name we use today, Mare Mediterraneum, meaning sea in the middle of the land. To them, it was Mare Nostrum, our sea, the heart of their empire, which at its height in 117 CE encircled the entire Mediterranean coastline. The sea has witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The Egyptians, Minoans, Mycenaeans, Phoenicians, Greeks, Carthaginians, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Ottomans, and European colonial powers. All built their power on Mediterranean shores, and all eventually faded, while the sea remained. Ancient mariners navigated without compasses or maps, using the stars, the winds, the color of the water, and even the flight patterns of birds. They knew that certain seabirds never flew more than a certain distance from land, so following them could lead a lost ship to safety. They observed that dolphins often swam toward shore in the evening, providing another natural compass. The Mediterranean was also the birthplace of cartography as we know it. Around 150 CE, the Greek scholar Ptolemy created maps of the known world centered on the Mediterranean, establishing a grid system of latitude and longitude that would influence mapmaking for over 1,000 years. Trade goods crossed the Mediterranean in an endless flow. Grain from Egypt, the breadbasket of Rome. Olive oil from Spain and North Africa. Wine from Greece and Italy. Timber from Lebanon's cedar forests. Purple dye from Phoenician cities. Silk that had traveled the Silk Road from China. Spices from India and beyond. The sea lanes were so busy during Roman times that amphoras, the clay vessels used to transport wine and oil, accumulated on the seafloor in such quantities that archaeologists now use them as chronological markers. Millions of amphoras lie scattered across the Mediterranean seabed, creating what some scholars call the world's largest museum. Piracy has plagued Mediterranean waters for as long as ships have sailed them. The ancient Greeks struggled with pirates from Cilicia in southern Turkey. Julius Caesar himself was famously captured by pirates in 75 BCE near the island of Pharmacusa and held for ransom. A ransom he insisted they increase because the original demand was too low for a man of his stature. The Barbary corsairs, operating from North African ports, raided ships and coastal towns from the 16th to the 19th centuries, capturing an estimated 1 to 1.25 million Europeans and taking them as slaves. This piracy only ended with the Barbary Wars fought by the United States and European powers in the early 1800s. But the Mediterranean has also been a sea of knowledge and enlightenment. The Library of Alexandria in Egypt, founded around 300 BCE, was the ancient world's greatest repository of knowledge. containing perhaps 400,000 scrolls. Though it was destroyed gradually through several incidents rather than one catastrophic fire, its influence on preserving Greek, Egyptian, and other ancient knowledge was immeasurable. The sea facilitated the spread of three great monotheistic religions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all emerged from lands touching the Mediterranean, and all three spread along its coasts and across its waters. The sea carried not just goods but ideas, philosophies, technologies, and faiths. One of the most valuable commodities ever traded across the Mediterranean was a color, Tyrian purple, produced from the mucus of murex sea snails. It took approximately 12,000 snails to produce just 1.4 grams of dye, enough to color only a small strip of fabric. This made purple cloth so expensive that it became the exclusive color of royalty and the very wealthy. The Mediterranean has also been a battlefield. The Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, where the Greek fleet defeated the Persian invasion force in the narrow straits near Athens, changed the course of Western history. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, decided who would rule the Roman world. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571 was the last major naval battle fought primarily with galleys, warships powered by rowers. The Christian Holy League's victory over the Ottoman fleet involved over 400 ships and 140,000 soldiers, sailors, and rowers, making it one of the largest naval battles in history. During World War II, the Mediterranean became a crucial theater of conflict. Control of the sea meant control of supply routes to North Africa and access to Middle Eastern oil. The Siege of Malta from 1940 to 1942 was one of the war's longest and most intense aerial campaigns, with the small island nation enduring more than 3,000 bombing raids. Today, the Mediterranean is one of the world's busiest shipping routes. Approximately 30% of the world's international shipping passes through it, and about 20 to 30% of global oil shipping crosses its waters. The Suez Canal alone sees about 12% of global trade pass through it annually, making this ancient sea vital to modern commerce. But this heavy use comes at a cost. The Mediterranean is one of the most polluted seas on Earth. It receives approximately 730 tons of plastic waste every day, with plastic accounting for 95% of the waste floating in its waters and lying on its beaches. Some estimates suggest that by 2050, there could be more plastic than fish in Mediterranean waters if current trends continue. The sea receives pollution from 150 rivers, but 4 major rivers contribute the most: the Nile, the Pur, the Ebro, and the Rhone. These rivers carry agricultural runoff, industrial waste, and sewage from the 150 million people who live along the Mediterranean coast, a number that swells to over 200 million during the summer tourist season. Tourism is both a blessing and a curse for the Mediterranean. The region receives about 360 million tourists annually, roughly 1/3 of the world's international tourists. This brings economic benefits but also puts enormous pressure on water resources, generates waste, and damages sensitive coastal ecosystems. Overfishing is another critical problem. About 75% of Mediterranean fish stocks are overfished, with some species depleted to just 10% of their historical levels. Bluefin tuna, once abundant throughout the sea, has been fished so intensively for the Japanese sashimi market that the Mediterranean population has declined by more than 85% since the 1950s. The Mediterranean is also warming faster than the global ocean average. Over the past 30 years, its surface waters have warmed by about 0.4 degrees Celsius per decade, a rate significantly higher than the global average of 0.13 degrees Celsius per decade. This warming is changing the sea's ecology in profound ways. Tropical species from the Red Sea are moving into the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal, a phenomenon called Reception migration, named after Ferdinand de Lesseps, the canal's builder. More than 400 Red Sea species have now been documented in the Mediterranean, some becoming invasive and outcompeting native species. One of the most problematic invaders is the lionfish, a venomous predator native to the Indo-Pacific that appeared in the Mediterranean around 2012, likely arriving via the Suez Canal. With no natural predators and an voracious appetite, lionfish are decimating native fish populations in the eastern Mediterranean. Another invasive species is Caulerpa cylindracea, a green alga that forms dense underwater meadows, smothering native seagrass beds that provide crucial habitat for fish and other marine life. It now covers vast areas of the Mediterranean seafloor, fundamentally altering these ecosystems. Yet, the Mediterranean also shows remarkable resilience. Posidonia oceanica, an endemic seagrass found throughout the sea, forms meadows that are among the oldest living organisms on Earth. Some meadows are estimated to be over 100,000 years old, having survived ice ages, sea level changes, and countless storms. These seagrass meadows are critically important. They produce oxygen, filter water, provide nursery habitat for fish, and protect coastlines from erosion. 1 square meter of Posidonia meadow can support up to 350 different species. Yet the Mediterranean has lost 13 to 50% of its Posidonia meadows over the past century, mostly due to coastal development, pollution, and damage from boat anchors and trawling. The Mediterranean is home to some extraordinary underwater features. Off the coast of Egypt lies the submerged city of Heraklion, once Egypt's main port before the founding of Alexandria. The entire city sank beneath the waves, possibly due to liquefaction of the sediments during earthquakes, and lay forgotten for over 1,000 years until its rediscovery in 2000. Similarly, the ancient Roman city of Baiae, once a luxurious resort town for the wealthy near Naples, now lies 6 meters underwater due to volcanic activity that caused the land to subside. Divers can swim through its streets and buildings, exploring a remarkably preserved underwater archaeological park. The island of Santorini in the Aegean is actually the rim of a massive volcanic caldera created by one of the largest eruptions in human history. Around 1600 BCE, the Minoan eruption blew apart the island with a force estimated at 4 times that of the 1883 Krakatoa eruption. This catastrophic event may have inspired Plato's story of Atlantis, written about 900 years later. The eruption generated tsunamis up to 35 to 40 meters high that devastated coastal settlements across the eastern Mediterranean, and the volcanic ash fallout affected climate as far away as China, as recorded in ancient tree rings. Mount Etna in Sicily is Europe's most active volcano and one of the world's most active. It has been erupting almost continuously for at least 3,500 years, with historical records of its eruptions dating back to 1500 BCE. Despite, or perhaps because of, its volcanic activity, Etna's slopes are densely populated, with the fertile volcanic soils supporting vineyards, orchards, and farms. The Mediterranean seafloor continues to reveal secrets. In 1900, sponge divers discovered the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek analog computer built around 100 BCE, in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. This incredibly sophisticated device could predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance, revealing a level of technological capability that wouldn't be matched again for over 1,000 years. The sea's remarkable clarity and stable conditions have preserved shipwrecks in extraordinary detail. The Phoenician shipwreck discovered off Malta in 2007 dates to 700 BCE and is one of the oldest shipwrecks ever found. At a depth of 110 meters, the ship and its cargo of amphoras have been preserved almost perfectly in the cold, oxygen-poor deep water. Underwater archaeology in the Mediterranean has revolutionized our understanding of ancient maritime trade. The Uluburun shipwreck off Turkey, which sank around 1300 BCE, carried a cargo worth more than the GDP of a small ancient kingdom. 10 tons of copper, 1 ton of tin, hippopotamus teeth, elephant ivory, ostrich eggs, amber from the Baltic, and luxury goods from a dozen different civilizations. The Mediterranean has also inspired artists, writers, and poets for millennia. Homer's Odyssey, composed around 800 BCE, tells of Odysseus's 10-year journey home across the Mediterranean after the Trojan War, encountering mythical creatures and divine beings among its islands and coasts. The color blue has always held special significance for Mediterranean peoples. The ancient Egyptians created Egyptian blue, the first synthetic pigment, around 2500 BCE by heating together limestone, sand, and copper. This brilliant blue adorned temples and tombs and was traded throughout the Mediterranean world. The Greeks believed the sea was the domain of Poseidon, the temperamental god who could grant safe passage or stir up deadly storms. Sailors made offerings to him before voyages, and cities built temples in his honor along the coasts. The Romans adopted him as Neptune, and his influence on Mediterranean maritime culture persisted even after Christianity became the region's dominant religion. Mediterranean islands have served as refuges, prisons, and places of pilgrimage. Napoleon was exiled to Elba off the coast of Italy in 1814, though he escaped after just 300 days. St. Paul was shipwrecked on Malta during his journey to Rome, an event that led to the island's early conversion to Christianity. The Knights of St. John, a Catholic military order, ruled Malta from 1530 to 1798, building massive fortifications that still stand today. They successfully defended the island against an Ottoman siege in 1565, a battle that involved over 40,000 troops and lasted nearly 4 months, shaping the political and religious boundaries of the Mediterranean for centuries to come. The sea has also been a place of mystery and wonder. The Strait of Messina between Sicily and mainland Italy is home to the legendary whirlpool Charybdis, mentioned in Homer's Odyssey. While not as monstrous as the myth suggests, the strait does create powerful currents and whirlpools when tides and winds align. The same strait hosts another natural phenomenon that has captured imaginations for millennia: the Fata Morgana, a complex form of superior mirage that can make distant objects appear to float in the sky or make the coastline appear completely different. In ancient times, these mirages were thought to be fairy castles or enchanted cities. Dolphins have always held a special place in Mediterranean culture. Ancient Greeks considered them sacred and believed that killing a dolphin was as serious a crime as killing a human. The story of Arion, a poet who was rescued from drowning by a dolphin, was widely known in the ancient world and may have been based on real dolphin rescue behaviors still occasionally observed today. The Mediterranean monk seal, now critically endangered, was once abundant throughout the sea. Ancient Greek coins depicted these seals, and they appear in Roman mosaics and frescoes. Aristotle wrote about them in his Historia Animalium, describing their behavior and habitat with remarkable accuracy. These seals need caves or secluded beaches to rest and give birth, but coastal development has destroyed most of their habitat. The largest remaining population, about 250 to 300 individuals, lives along the coasts of Greece and Turkey, with smaller groups in the Aegean Islands and isolated Mediterranean caves. The sea continues to provide livelihoods for millions of people. Small-scale fisheries employ about 60,000 fishers across the Mediterranean, using traditional methods that have changed little in centuries. Small boats, hand lines, nets, and traps. These artisanal fishers catch less than 10% of the fish taken from the sea but represent 80% of the fishing fleet. Mediterranean cuisine, celebrated worldwide, is fundamentally shaped by the sea and its climate. The Mediterranean diet, rich in fish, olive oil, vegetables, whole grains, and moderate amounts of wine, has been recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity and is associated with numerous health benefits, including reduced risk of heart disease and increased longevity. And so the story of the Mediterranean continues, this ancient sea that has witnessed the entire span of human civilization in the West, from the first boats carved from logs to the container ships and cruise liners of today. It remains what it has always been: a bridge between continents, a highway of culture, a source of life and livelihood, and a place of endless beauty and mystery. The waves that lap against its shores tonight have been doing so for millions of years, and will continue long after we're gone, keeping the sea's timeless rhythm. The Mediterranean holds within its depths a living calendar of Earth's climate history. Scientists drilling into the seafloor have extracted sediment cores that reveal a record stretching back millions of years. Each layer of sediment, sometimes just millimeters thick, represents thousands of years of history. Fallen plankton shells, volcanic ash, wind-blown dust from the Sahara. These cores tell us that the Mediterranean has experienced dramatic changes in sea level throughout its history. During the last ice age, which peaked about 20,000 years ago, so much water was locked up in glaciers that the Mediterranean sea level was approximately 120 to 130 meters lower than it is today. Coastlines extended far beyond their current positions, and many islands were connected to the mainland. At that time, you could have walked from Sicily to Tunisia across what is now the Strait of Sicily. The Adriatic Sea was mostly dry land, and early humans hunting mammoths and other Ice Age megafauna roamed across landscapes now submerged beneath blue waters. As the climate warmed and ice sheets melted, the sea rose at rates sometimes exceeding 1 meter per century. Coastal settlements were gradually abandoned as the waters advanced, their remains now lying beneath the waves. Underwater archaeologists have discovered stone tools, pottery, and even the foundations of buildings on continental shelves around the Mediterranean. This ancient sea level rise may have inspired flood myths preserved in the oral traditions of Mediterranean peoples. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest written stories, originating in Mesopotamia around 2100 BCE, tells of a great flood that covered the earth, a story with parallels in the biblical flood narrative and in Greek mythology. The Mediterranean's connection to human mythology runs deep. The ancient Greeks believed that the sunset occurred when the sun god Helios drove his chariot into the western sea, and that it emerged each morning from the eastern waters. The Pillars of Hercules at Gibraltar marked the edge of the known world, beyond which lay the mysterious and terrifying Atlantic. The Phoenicians, however, were braver. Around 600 BCE, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II commissioned Phoenician sailors to circumnavigate Africa. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, writing 150 years later, they succeeded, a voyage that would have taken approximately 3 years. They sailed south from the Red Sea, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and returned through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. The Phoenician city of Carthage, founded around 814 BCE on the North African coast in what is now Tunisia, became one of the Mediterranean's greatest powers. At its height, Carthage controlled a trading empire stretching from North Africa to Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, challenging Rome for dominance of the Western Mediterranean. The three Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, spanning 264 to 146 BCE, were among the bloodiest conflicts in ancient history. The Second Punic War featured Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps with war elephants to invade Italy, an astonishing military feat that brought Rome to the brink of defeat. When Rome finally destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE, legend says that Roman soldiers plowed salt into the city's soil so that nothing would ever grow there again. Whether true or not, Carthage was so thoroughly demolished that its exact harbor layout remained unknown until modern archaeological excavations revealed the ingenious circular military harbor that could house 220 warships. The Roman engineering prowess extended throughout the Mediterranean. They built over 50,000 miles of paved roads connecting their empire, many of which still exist today. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, connected Rome to the Adriatic coast, while the Via Augusta ran along the Mediterranean coast of Spain. Roman aqueducts brought fresh water from distant mountains to coastal cities. The Pont du Gard in southern France, built around 50 CE, carried water across a valley using a bridge 49 meters high, built without mortar, using precisely cut stones held together by their own weight. It has stood for nearly 2,000 years. The Romans also developed concrete that could set underwater, allowing them to build massive harbor structures throughout the Mediterranean. The harbor at Caesarea in ancient Judea, built by Herod the Great around 22 BCE, used concrete that has proven more durable than modern Portland cement. Scientists have recently discovered that the Roman concrete actually grows stronger over time as seawater reacts with the volcanic ash in the mixture. Roman lighthouses guided ships safely into these harbors. The Pharos of Alexandria, built around 280 BCE, was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, standing approximately 100 to 130 meters tall. Its light, reflected and magnified by bronze mirrors, could reportedly be seen 50 kilometers out to sea. The lighthouse stood for over 1,500 years before earthquakes damaged it beyond repair in the 14th century. Its stones were later used to build the citadel of Capet, which still stands on the same site. In recent decades, underwater archaeologists have discovered massive stone blocks and statues from the original Pharos lying on the seafloor nearby. Alexandria itself was one of the ancient world's greatest cities, where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and other cultures blended. The city's scholars made extraordinary advances in mathematics, astronomy, and geography. Eratosthenes, the chief librarian at Alexandria around 240 BCE, calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy using only shadows cast by the sun at different locations and basic geometry. Another Alexandrian scholar, Hypatia, was perhaps history's first female mathematician of note. In the late 4th century CE, she taught mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, and improved upon the design of astrolabes, sophisticated instruments used for celestial navigation that would remain essential to Mediterranean sailors for over 1,000 years. But Alexandria also witnessed tragedy. In the 4th and 5th centuries CE, religious and political conflicts led to violence. Hypatia was murdered by a mob in 415 CE, and portions of the Great Library were destroyed in various incidents. The final destruction came with the Arab conquest in 642 CE, by which time most of the library's contents had already been lost or scattered. The rise of Islam in the 7th century transformed the Mediterranean world. Within a century of the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Muslim armies had conquered the entire southern and eastern Mediterranean coast, from Spain to the borders of India. Arabic became the dominant language of science and culture across much of the Mediterranean basin. During Europe's early Middle Ages, Islamic scholars preserved and built upon Greek and Roman knowledge that had been lost in Christian Europe. They translated works of Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, and Ptolemy into Arabic, adding their own advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and chemistry. The Arabic numerals we use today, including the crucial concept of zero, reached Europe through the Mediterranean, transmitted by Islamic scholars who had learned them from Indian mathematicians. The word algebra comes from the Arabic al-jabr, and algorithm derives from the name of the 9th century Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi. Islamic architecture transformed Mediterranean cities. The Great Mosque of Córdoba in Spain, begun in 784 CE, featured hundreds of columns creating a forest of arches that inspired awe and devotion. The Alhambra Palace in Granada, built primarily in the 13th and 14th centuries, demonstrated geometric sophistication and engineering skill that still astounds visitors today. Trade flourished under Islamic rule. Muslim merchants established trade networks connecting the Mediterranean to the Silk Road, bringing spices, silk, and porcelain from China, ivory and gold from sub-Saharan Africa, and sugar, coffee, and cotton from the Middle East and India. The Crusades, beginning in 1095 CE, brought centuries of conflict between Christian and Muslim powers over control of the Holy Land and the Eastern Mediterranean. These religious wars were devastating for the region, but paradoxically also increased cultural exchange. European crusaders encountered advanced Islamic civilization and brought back knowledge, technologies, and goods that would help spark the Renaissance. The city of Venice became a major beneficiary of the Crusades. Venetian merchants provided ships to transport crusaders and traded with both Christian and Muslim states. By the 13th century, Venice had become perhaps the Mediterranean's wealthiest city, controlling a maritime empire stretching from northern Italy to Crete and Cyprus. The Venetian arsenal, established in 1104 CE, was the world's first mass production facility. At its peak, this massive shipyard employed 16,000 workers and could produce a complete warship in a single day using assembly line techniques that anticipated the Industrial Revolution by 600 years. Venice's rival was Genoa, another Italian maritime republic. The competition between these two cities drove innovation in shipbuilding, navigation, and banking. Genoese merchants established trading posts throughout the Mediterranean and Black Sea, reaching as far as China. One Genoese sailor, Christopher Columbus, would use Mediterranean navigational knowledge to cross the Atlantic in 1492. But catastrophe struck the Mediterranean in 1347. Ships arriving in Sicily from the Black Sea brought not just goods, but also rats carrying fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. This was the beginning of the Black Death, which would kill between 30 to 60% of Europe's population over the next 5 years. The plague spread along trade routes, devastating Mediterranean cities first before moving inland. Entire villages were abandoned. Trade collapsed. Labor shortages led to economic upheaval and social change. Some historians argue that the Black Death's disruption of the feudal system helped pave the way for the Renaissance and the modern world. Yet life continued, and the Mediterranean remained central to European culture and commerce. The Renaissance, beginning in Italy in the 14th century, was partly financed by Mediterranean trade wealth. Artists, architects, and thinkers rediscovered classical Greek and Roman texts, many preserved by Islamic scholars, and created works that would define Western culture. Leonardo da Vinci, born in 1452 near Florence, studied Mediterranean birds and fish to understand flight and hydrodynamics. His notebooks contain designs for submarines and diving equipment, inspired by his observations of Mediterranean marine life. Though most of his inventions were never built in his lifetime, they demonstrated a scientific approach that would eventually transform the world. The 15th century brought another transformative change to the Mediterranean. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople, ending the thousand-year Byzantine Empire. The city, renamed Istanbul, would become the capital of an Islamic empire that would dominate the eastern Mediterranean for the next 4 centuries. The Ottoman conquest cut off traditional overland trade routes to Asia, motivating European powers to seek sea routes around Africa to India and China. This sparked the age of exploration, as Portuguese, Spanish, and later Dutch, English, and French ships ventured beyond the Mediterranean into the Atlantic and eventually around the world. The Mediterranean, which had been the center of the known world for millennia, suddenly became a regional sea. The discovery of the Americas in 1492 and the establishment of direct sea routes to Asia shifted the center of global trade to the Atlantic. Cities like London, Amsterdam, and later New York would eclipse Mediterranean ports in wealth and power. Yet the Mediterranean remained important. The Ottoman Empire controlled the eastern Mediterranean, while Spain dominated much of the western and central sea. Naval battles continued to shape the region's destiny. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where a Christian coalition defeated the Ottoman fleet, was celebrated throughout Europe as a crucial victory, though historians now debate its actual strategic significance. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the gradual decline of Mediterranean commerce relative to Atlantic trade. But the Mediterranean remained culturally influential. The Grand Tour, an educational rite of passage for wealthy young Europeans, always included extensive travel around the Mediterranean. Young aristocrats visited Rome, Naples, Athens, and Constantinople, studying classical ruins and encountering different cultures. These travelers wrote accounts, made sketches and paintings, and brought back antiquities. Their writings and art inspired romantic movements in literature and painting. Lord Byron fought and died in Greece's War of Independence against Ottoman rule in 1824, embodying the romantic fascination with Mediterranean culture and history. The 19th century brought industrialization and nationalism to the Mediterranean. Steamships replaced sailing vessels, making travel faster and more reliable. The first steam-powered ship crossed the Mediterranean in 1818, and by mid-century, regular steamer service connected Mediterranean ports. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in 1798 to 1801, though ultimately unsuccessful militarily, sparked European fascination with ancient Egypt. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone during this campaign provided the key to deciphering hieroglyphics, opening up thousands of years of Egyptian history to modern understanding. The completion of the Suez Canal in 1869 revolutionized Mediterranean shipping. What had been a regional sea suddenly became the shortest route between Europe and Asia. Ships no longer needed to sail around Africa to reach India, China, or Australia. The Mediterranean's strategic importance surged. Britain recognized this immediately and secured control of the canal and Egypt. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli purchased Egypt's shares in the Suez Canal Company in 1875, and Britain occupied Egypt in 1882, maintaining effective control until the 1950s. Control of the canal meant control of the route to India, the jewel of the British Empire. Other European powers scrambled to establish their own Mediterranean positions. France colonized Algeria in 1830 and later Tunisia and Morocco. Italy seized Libya from the Ottoman Empire in 1911. the Mediterranean became divided between European colonial empires, with local populations subject to foreign rule. World War I saw significant naval operations in the Mediterranean. The Gallipoli campaign in 1915 to 1916, where Allied forces attempted to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war by seizing Constantinople through the Dardanelles, resulted in over 500,000 casualties and achieved nothing strategically. Among the soldiers who fought at Gallipoli was a young Turkish officer named Mustafa Kemal, who would later become Ataturk, founder of modern Turkey. The interwar period brought changes to the Mediterranean world. The Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I, and its territories were divided. New nations emerged, including Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Greece and Turkey fought a bitter war from 1919 to 1922, ending with a massive population exchange that saw 1.5 million Greeks expelled from Turkey and 500,000 Muslims expelled from Greece. The Mediterranean witnessed some of World War II's fiercest fighting. The North African Campaign, the invasions of Sicily and Italy, and the naval warfare that raged for control of supply routes made the Mediterranean a crucial theater. More than 2,500 Allied and Axis ships were sunk in Mediterranean waters during the war. After World War II, the Mediterranean world underwent profound transformations. The colonial empires that had dominated the region for centuries began to crumble. Libya gained independence in 1951, Tunisia and Morocco in 1956, Algeria after a brutal 8-year war in 1962. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, asserting sovereignty over this vital waterway despite British and French military attempts to reverse the decision. The Cold War brought new tensions to the Mediterranean. The sea became a frontier between NATO in the north and Soviet-aligned states. The U.S. Sixth Fleet patrolled the waters, while Soviet warships operated from bases in Syria and Libya. This military presence meant that the Mediterranean remained one of the most heavily armed seas in the world throughout the second half of the 20th century. The Israeli-Arab conflict added another layer of tension. The wars of 1948, 1967, and 1973 all had Mediterranean dimensions. Israeli and Arab navies clashed in these waters, and the closure or opening of the Suez Canal during conflicts significantly impacted global shipping and oil prices. Yet amid these conflicts, something remarkable was happening beneath the waves. In 1943, French naval officer Jacques Cousteau and engineer Émile Gagnan invented the aqualung, the first successful and safe open-circuit scuba diving system. Cousteau tested his invention in the Mediterranean near Marseille, opening up the underwater world to exploration. Cousteau's subsequent films and books revealed the Mediterranean's underwater beauty to millions. His ship, Calypso, became famous for its voyages documenting marine life. His work helped spark the modern environmental movement and brought attention to the threats facing the world's oceans, including the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean seafloor has revealed treasures that rewrite history. In 1982, the wreck of a 5th century BCE Greek merchant ship was discovered off the coast of Sicily. The ship's cargo included bronze and marble statues, including the famous dancing satyr, a rare example of Greek sculpture that survived antiquity intact because it had been protected by the sea. More recently, in 2016, researchers discovered evidence of ancient human presence on the Greek island of Naxos dating back 200,000 years, far earlier than previously thought possible. This finding suggests that ancient humans or Neanderthals were capable of seafaring much earlier than scientists had believed, potentially using the Mediterranean islands as stepping stones for migration. The Mediterranean's geological activity continues to shape the region. The devastating earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria in February 2023 killed over 50,000 people, reminding us that the collision of tectonic plates beneath the sea continues to threaten the densely populated coastlines above. Mount Etna erupts so frequently that it has become a tourist attraction. Visitors can often watch lava flows from safe distances, and the mountain's activity is monitored by one of the world's most sophisticated volcano observation systems. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, Etna's slopes remain densely populated, with towns and villages perched on ancient lava flows. Santorini, too, remains volcanically active. Small eruptions occurred as recently as 1950, and the caldera shows signs of unrest. Scientists monitor the island carefully, knowing that another major eruption, while unlikely in the near term, would be catastrophic for the region. The Mediterranean's influence on climate extends far beyond its shores. The sea acts as a massive heat reservoir, moderating temperatures across southern Europe and North Africa. In winter, the relatively warm sea keeps coastal areas mild, while in summer, sea breezes provide relief from inland heat. But this climate is changing. The Mediterranean region is warming 20% faster than the global average, and climate models predict that by 2100, the region could be 3 to 5 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial times. This warming is already having visible effects. Sea surface temperatures in the Mediterranean have increased by about 1.4 degrees Celsius since the mid-1980s. During summer heat waves, surface temperatures in the eastern Mediterranean now regularly exceed 30 degrees Celsius. Temperatures once considered exceptional are becoming normal. This warming is causing the sea to stratify. Warm surface waters sit atop cooler deep waters with less mixing between them. This reduces the upwelling of nutrients from depth, making the already nutrient-poor Mediterranean even less productive. Fish populations are shifting northward and to deeper waters seeking cooler temperatures. The Mediterranean is also becoming more saline. As temperatures rise, evaporation increases, but the rivers feeding the Mediterranean are carrying less water due to drought, dam construction, and increased water extraction for agriculture and cities. Some studies suggest the sea's salinity has increased by 0.1 to 0.2 parts per thousand over the past 50 years. Sea level in the Mediterranean is rising at a rate of about 2.5 to 3 millimeters per year, slightly less than the global average but still significant. By 2100, sea levels in the Mediterranean could rise by 40 to 100 centimeters, depending on how much greenhouse gases humanity emits. This would inundate many coastal areas and threaten historic sites. Alexandria, one of the ancient world's greatest cities, is particularly vulnerable. Much of the city sits less than 5 meters above sea level, and some areas are already experiencing regular flooding during winter storms. By 2050, parts of the city could be permanently underwater without major protective infrastructure. Venice faces a similar threat. The city has been slowly sinking for centuries due to natural geological processes and groundwater extraction, while sea levels rise. The combination means that aqua alta, high water flooding, is becoming more frequent and severe. The MOSE project, a system of movable barriers at the lagoon entrances, was completed in 2020 to protect the city, but questions remain about whether it will be sufficient as seas continue to rise. The Mediterranean's ancient port cities face a cruel irony. They were built on the coast to take advantage of maritime trade, but now that same sea threatens to reclaim them. Cities like Barcelona, Marseille, Athens, Istanbul, and Tel Aviv are all developing plans to protect their coastal infrastructure from rising seas and stronger storms. Meanwhile, new threats emerge from unexpected sources. The lionfish invasion mentioned earlier has spread throughout the eastern Mediterranean, and these voracious predators are now appearing in the central and western Mediterranean as well. With no natural predators and the ability to consume fish equal to half their body weight daily, they're causing significant ecological damage. Scientists have attempted various control measures, including promoting lionfish as a food fish. They're actually quite tasty and safe to eat if the venomous spines are properly removed. Some Mediterranean restaurants now feature lionfish on their menus, and fishing competitions specifically targeting lionfish have been organized. But the fish reproduce too quickly and hide too effectively for these efforts to eliminate them. Another invasive species causing problems is the silver-cheeked toadfish, which produces a powerful neurotoxin that can cause paralysis and death if consumed. This fish, native to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, entered the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal and has established populations along the coasts of Turkey, Greece, and the Levant. Several people have died from eating it, mistaking it for edible fish species. Yet nature also shows us resilience. Loggerhead sea turtles, which nest on Mediterranean beaches, have shown remarkable adaptability. Conservation efforts have helped stabilize or increase populations in several areas. In Greece, which hosts some of the Mediterranean's most important nesting beaches, local communities and conservation organizations have worked together to protect nesting sites while still allowing tourism. The Mediterranean monk seal, despite its critically endangered status, has shown slight population increases in recent years thanks to intensive conservation efforts. Protected marine areas and breeding caves in Greece, Turkey, and Croatia have given these seals refuge. Each birth is celebrated by conservationists as a small victory against extinction. Bluefin tuna, so heavily overfished that their Mediterranean population declined by more than 85%, may be recovering. Stricter fishing quotas implemented in the 2000s have allowed populations to begin rebuilding. In 2020, scientists reported that Atlantic bluefin tuna populations had increased significantly, though they remain well below historical levels. These conservation successes demonstrate that recovery is possible when action is taken. Marine protected areas now cover about 6% of the Mediterranean Sea, though scientists recommend that at least 30% should be protected to ensure the long-term health of marine ecosystems. One of the most successful protected areas is the Pelagos Sanctuary in the Ligurian Sea between France, Monaco, and Italy. Established in 1999, it covers 87,500 square kilometers, the world's first international marine protected area. It provides protection for 8 species of whales and dolphins, including fin whales, the second largest animals on Earth. Fin whales, which can reach lengths of 27 meters and weigh up to 74 tons, migrate through the Mediterranean, feeding in the nutrient-rich waters of the Ligurian Sea during summer. Watching these giants glide through the blue waters is a reminder that despite all the pressures on the Mediterranean, it still supports magnificent life. Sperm whales also inhabit Mediterranean waters, though in small numbers. These deep-diving whales can descend to depths of over 2,000 meters, hunting giant squid in the darkness. The Hellenic Trench, the Mediterranean's deepest area, is one of their preferred habitats. Researchers estimate only about 200 to 300 sperm whales live in the Mediterranean, making them one of the sea's rarest large animals. Short-beaked common dolphins, once abundant throughout the Mediterranean, have declined dramatically in recent decades due to overfishing of their prey species, pollution, and accidental capture in fishing nets. They've disappeared entirely from some areas where they were once common. conservation efforts are now focused on understanding their remaining populations and protecting critical habitat. The Mediterranean's smaller creatures also face challenges. The date mussel, Lithophaga, is a species that bores into rock to create its burrow. Considered a delicacy in some Mediterranean countries, these mussels have been harvested for food since ancient times, but collecting them requires breaking apart the rock they inhabit, destroying habitat. The species is now protected, but illegal harvesting continues in some areas. Red coral, Corallium rubrum, has been harvested from Mediterranean depths for over 5,000 years. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans valued it for jewelry and decoration. During the Renaissance, Mediterranean coral was one of the most valuable commodities in trade with Asia. Today, overharvesting has depleted populations, and climate change threatens the deep-water habitats where the remaining corals grow. The Mediterranean's fish markets still display an incredible diversity of species: red mullet, gilt-head bream, European sea bass, octopus, squid, and dozens of others. But fishmongers and older fishers tell stories of change. Fish are smaller than they used to be, catches are less predictable, and species that were once rare are now common, while common species have become rare. Traditional fishing methods persist alongside modern industrial fishing. In the Strait of Messina, fishers still use the ancient technique of swordfish harpooning from small boats, just as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. The lookout stands high on a mast, scanning for the dorsal fins of swordfish, calling directions to the harpooner who stands at the bow. In Tunisia, fishers continue to practice tanara, a traditional method of tuna fishing using a complex system of nets called mudrags that guide migrating tuna into a final chamber where they're caught. This practice dates back at least to Roman times and represents a sustainable way of fishing that takes only part of the migrating population. The Mediterranean diet, long celebrated for its health benefits, is intimately connected to the sea. Fish consumption, particularly of small oily fish like sardines and anchovies rich in omega-3 fatty acids, is a key component. But as fish stocks decline and prices rise, many Mediterranean people are eating less fish than their grandparents did, potentially losing both a cultural tradition and health benefits. Olive oil, another cornerstone of Mediterranean cuisine, comes from olive trees that thrive in the Mediterranean climate. Some olive trees in the Mediterranean region are over 1,000 years old and still producing fruit. The oldest known olive tree, in Crete, is estimated to be between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. The cultivation of olives transformed Mediterranean landscapes over millennia. Terraced hillsides throughout the region were created to grow olives and grapes, reshaping the land itself. These agricultural terraces, some dating back thousands of years, are now recognized as cultural heritage, though many are being abandoned as young people leave rural areas for cities. Wine production in the Mediterranean dates back at least 6,000 years. The ancient Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans all produced wine and traded it throughout the Mediterranean world. Amphoras stamped with the seals of different wine-producing regions have been found in shipwrecks across the sea, evidence of a sophisticated wine trade that spanned the ancient world. Today, Mediterranean countries produce about 60% of the world's wine. Italy, France, and Spain alone account for nearly half of global wine production. The Mediterranean climate, hot, dry summers, and mild, wet winters, creates ideal conditions for grape cultivation, though climate change is beginning to affect traditional wine-growing regions. The Mediterranean has also given the world many other crops that are now grown globally. Wheat, one of humanity's first domesticated crops, was first cultivated in the Fertile Crescent region of the eastern Mediterranean about 10,000 years ago. This single development enabled the rise of civilization as we know it. Figs, grapes, pomegranates, dates, and lemons all originated in or around the Mediterranean region and were spread by traders across the world. The Romans were particularly skilled at transplanting crops, establishing olive groves and vineyards throughout their empire, even in regions like Britain that were marginal for these crops. The Mediterranean's agricultural abundance led the ancient Greeks to believe their land was specially blessed by the gods. The climate and soil seemed almost miraculous in their productivity. Modern science explains this through geology. Volcanic soils enriched by millennia of eruptions, limestone that weathers to create fertile soils, and a climate that provides distinct growing and dormant seasons. But this agricultural tradition faces challenges. Climate change is shifting optimal growing conditions northward. Droughts are becoming longer and more severe. The ancient practice of dry farming, growing crops without irrigation by carefully managing soil moisture, is becoming increasingly difficult as rainfall patterns change. Water scarcity is perhaps the Mediterranean's greatest challenge in the 21st century. The region is home to some of the world's most water-stressed countries. The Mediterranean receives only about 3% of the world's water resources while supporting 7% of the global population. Competition for water between agriculture, cities, and tourism creates intense pressures. Some countries are turning to desalination, removing salt from seawater to create fresh water. Israel now produces about 80% of its domestic water supply through desalination, and Spain, Algeria, and other Mediterranean countries are rapidly expanding their desalination capacity. But desalination requires enormous amounts of energy and produces concentrated brine that must be carefully disposed of to avoid harming marine ecosystems.